Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Transportation and Environment Committee. Today's work session will be on the FY 22 to 27 Capital Improvements Program for the Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission, WSSC. As you all know, unlike other county agency CIP proposals that are reviewed biannually, the Council reviews the WSSC CIP every year. Today, we'll receive an overview from WSSC on the CIP, and hopefully the committee can take a preliminary vote. I want to thank the WSSC staff and the executive for being here today. I just want to highlight that we will continue to replace our outdated infrastructure as quickly as possible. In addition, and we'll continue our focus on increasing efficiency and meeting all the needs of residents. Before moving forward, do any of my colleagues have any opening remarks they need to share? Okay. Well, welcome, Ms. Reed and your team. We're so glad you could join us, and I'll turn it over to our excellent staff analyst, Keith Lebchenko, to walk us through the packet. Keith.
Right, and just a couple of points before I ask WSSC to get into their summary. As you mentioned, this is an annual process for WSSC, which is different from all the other agencies and county government. So we take a comprehensive look each year at the WSSC CIP. Also, of course, because it's a bi-county budget, it has that additional process of us having to come to agreement with Prince George's County. The CIP was included within the CIP public hearing process that the council heard earlier this month for the CIP. So it is wrapped up into that process. And we expect the council will preliminarily review the WSSC CIP as a body within the next few weeks. And then April, we'll have the operating budget discussion. And then in May, we'll have the full council discussion of any operating and capital issues remaining. And then the bi-county meeting is scheduled for May 13th. So that's when we would resolve any issues with Prince George's. We did get a recommendation from the county executive as part of his January 15th CIP recommendations. He did not recommend any specific changes to the WSSC CIP, although he did note at that time an expectation of a mid-cycle update, which we later did receive, related to the advanced metering infrastructure project, which the commission had suspended as part of as a decision in its November meeting. So that occurred after the proposed CIP had come out. That's why a mid-cycle update is needed for that. So the numbers that you'll see WSSC will present reflect the mid-cycle update. And I'll get into more of that as we get into the numbers a little bit. But with that, I'll turn it over to WSSC. We have a number of folks from WSSC here today. And we also do have staff from OMB and DEP. But with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Reed for any introductory comments, and then I will queue up the slides for them and share my screen as soon as we're ready to go.
Well, thank you, Keith Lebchenko. I appreciate the opportunity to be before the T&E committee. Hello, President Hucker and council members Reamer and Glass. It is with great pride that I stand here to represent WSSC Water and to highlight some of the major projects from our capital improvements budget. And with that, I am going to turn it over to my team to review some of the slides that we have that make those highlights. It's a very modest increases in our capital improvements budget, and it's for making sure that our infrastructure is ready to serve all of our customers and your constituents. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Patty Callahan, our Chief Financial Officer.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to actually pass it over to Letitia Carolina Powell, who is our Budget Division Manager, and she will start the presentation, and then she'll pass it to Mark Brackett, who is our Capital Budget Section Manager. So Letitia and Mark, turning over to you. Thank you.
And can everyone see the slides that I brought up?
I think so.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Welcome, Patty, Letitia, and Mark. Good to see you all.
Good afternoon. My name is Letitia Carolina Powell, and I'm the Budget Division Manager. and I will be covering, next slide, please. I'll be covering our strategic priorities, the long-range financial plan, and capital budget affordability. Mark Brackett will cover our FY22 CIP overview, highlights, and projects. Next slide. The CIP directly aligns with our strategic priorities. We make sure that our infrastructure is reliable and safe, and we deliver safe, clean water via our infrastructure. We want to invest in our infrastructure wisely. This investment enhances our customer experience because our infrastructure is used to deliver our product to our customers. We also want to protect all of our resources. This investment is very important. Next slide, please. We are a capital-intensive agency and issue debt to finance our expenditures. The debt service, or principal and interest, is then paid out of our operating budget, so it has a direct impact on our rates. The fiscal year 22 proposed debt issuance is nearly $410 million. We are planning to lower our bond issuance limit to $350 million beginning in fiscal year 25. We utilize a multi-year financial planning process to set capital planning expectations for resource capacity and affordability. Fiscal policy guidelines help us to develop the CIP. These guidelines include 4 financial metrics that are important to maintaining our AAA rating. One of the first measures we consider is the impact of new debt issuances on debt service. Debt service coverage is the ability to pay current debt obligations. It measures that. Debt service coverage is gross revenue less operating and maintenance expenses, and how many times that net revenue number covers our debt service. The target was 1.1, but we thought it prudent to increase it to 1.25 over time. The coverage level is pretty tight right now, but we are working to improve that over the years. The next metric is debt service as a percentage of total expenses. The target for this is for the percentage to remain below 40%. Next is ending fund balance as a percentage of operating revenues. The minimum is 15%. We are meeting this target currently over the 6-year period. Days operating reserve on hand is the 4th metric. It is related to liquidity, and in the past, the target was 60 to 90 days. We thought it best to increase the target to 75 to 105 days, and we are projecting to be within the targeted range beginning in fiscal year 24. Next slide, please.
Yeah, just before we move on, I did want to highlight for the committee the second line, which mentions water and sewer combined rate increase. And you can see the 5.9%, which is the agreed upon increase from last fall's spending control limits process. And WSSC's initial scenario that they had brought over to us as part of that process was higher than the 5.9. And as you can see in 23 and 24 and 25, you do see increases higher than that as well. And that's directly related to trying to meet these metrics, and also then assuming certain amounts of increases on the operating side for operating expenses. So this financial plan does present sort of the difficulty that we have each year, which is balancing meeting these metrics, dealing with the cost increases that you would generally expect in a utility, and also more in particular in water and sewer utilities, we're seeing above average increases in rates nationwide. So this highlights that tension that we are dealing with each year in the spending control limits process.
Keith, what is an above average increase in rates?
Well, when we say above average, we tend to mean above inflation. So if generally, and WSSC can speak more to this, nationwide, we've seen a lot of water and sewer utilities with above above CPI type
Right.
increases in rates, and
Okay.
WSSC has also seen that.
Thanks.
Yes, and in fact, our neighboring jurisdictions like Baltimore and DC, they've been implementing rate increases that are actually higher than ours. Capital budget affordability. It is important to have a solid fiscal plan, and adhering to our financial metrics and guidelines allows us to maintain our AAA credit rating, and it keeps borrowing costs low. And given the level of debt that we issue, keeping borrowing costs low is crucial for affordability. It is important that we prioritize our projects and that we are careful about what projects we defer or eliminate in order to keep rates low. We are planning to increase the use of PAYGO beginning in fiscal year 24 to lower debt service expense and improve metric results, which will help maintain the AAA credit rating. And now I'll hand it over to Mark Brackett.
Thank you. Next slide. Good afternoon. I'm Mark Brackett. I'm the Capital Budget Section Manager. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the fiscal year 22 through 2027 CIP. 6-year program cost at $3.8 billion is approximately $100 million higher than last year's approved CIP. Most of the program, as I'm sure you're aware, is bond funded. 3.2 billion of that plus another 327 some million in PAYGO to pay for that. A large portion of our capital program is mandated projects. Over 1/3 of our budget, $1.3 billion, goes towards projects contributing to construction down at the Blue Plains Wastewater Treatment Plant, and almost $1 billion to meet the requirements of our 2 consent decrees over the next 6 years. In fiscal year 22, the budget amount is about $712 million. Again, bond funded $608 million plus the PAYGO, as we've spoken of, $27.6 million. And in the budget year, the mandated projects make up 28% of the requirement of our spending, almost $200 million. Next slide. We look at our CIP, we look at 3 major categories of spending. And it is our reinvestment in our systems infrastructure that makes up 91% of the fiscal year 22 budget year. This continues to be our overwhelming focus as we try to provide, the highest level of service possible to the 2 counties we serve. Next slide. In the budget year, fiscal year 22, again, looking at the funding sources. Here, 85% of the program is funded by long-term debt, and then the additional amount of PAYGO I mentioned, 27.6 million, adds another 4%. By far, as mentioned at the very beginning, we are very capital intensive. Long-term debt is the majority of the funding for our program. We also get funding from some state grants through MDE. Growth pays for growth. You see SDC and other, almost $50 million contributed in the budget year. And some minor contributions from local government, from Rockville, for their share of some of our projects. And that concludes our overview. Give it back to Keith.
Yeah. So the packet that I've laid out does go through all the projects. I'm just going to provide a quick summary and then hit a few highlights along the way. I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a moment. And as Mark mentioned, most of the CIP is supported by bonds. He did mention briefly that we do have some growth funded projects funded basically with developer contributions and system development charge revenues. Basically the concept that growth pays for growth. And the reason I mention that, it's a relatively small portion of the overall WSSCIP, but the number itself is still pretty big. And I just did want to note that SDC rates are, they're a rate that is annually reviewed, and those rates have not been increased for over 20 years. And we have started to see some some fiscal pressures in the SDC fund over the last 5 or 6 years. And this year in particular, I did want to note for the committee that there is a bi-county group that is looking at some possible changes to the way developer reimbursements would be done out of the project. In cases where developers have to build significant WSSC infrastructure, they are eligible to get reimbursed by WSSC, but there are some significant constraints on how that works. There's a first there's a 20-year time frame over which they could get repaid, but then also there's a geographic constraint in terms of where the SDC revenue comes from and where it can be paid. And both of those issues of the 20-year payback, which by itself is not guaranteed either, and this geographic constraint are being looked at by the group, and looking at whether to first guarantee the payback over a set period of time, but then also eliminate the geographic constraint. And the reason for that is because the kind of development we're seeing now more and more often is more infill type of development. And unlike large development projects in the past, where you have significant revenue coming in from the same general area, that's not necessarily going to be the case going forward. And so if we have development in areas that are otherwise built out, you may or may not get accompanying development around that same time. And you may or may not have the kind of revenue you would need to offset the developer's costs. So the group is looking at eliminating the geographic requirement and also providing a guaranteed payback. Now, of course, the flip side of that is it would require or it would cause an additional liability to WSSC within the SDC fund. They would have to have an assurance that they could raise sufficient revenues to cover those expected guaranteed payments. And that's something this group is looking at, and it'll come back to both councils on its own course. But I did want to let the committee members know that is something that we're looking at, and that where you would see that happen would be on the operating side. There would be a request or a request from WSSC and or the two councils agreeing to increase SDC rates. That's likely what would have to happen in order for us to implement some of this. So I just wanted committee members to be aware of that process and that it's happening. The committee doesn't have to make any kind of recommendation on that today, but I just wanted them to be aware of it. With regard to the CIP itself, and WSSC sort of alluded to this, they have a lot of what you would call mandated projects. I go a little bit further in my memo. I break down the projects, and I have a chart that shows the cost increases, the biggest cost increases and decreases by project. But I also show that if you count the Blue Plains projects and 8 other WSSC projects, that gets you to about 85% of WSSC CIP. So they have some very, very large projects in the CIP, and those are the ones we tend to focus on. And those are the ones that I've included in my packet. And we do have some slides on those, which I'm going to bring back up just to allow us to quickly go through them expeditiously. Bear with me, I'm just trying to bring it up. Okay. So WSSC did prepare some slides for us on some of their bigger projects. The first two noted here, well, the first one noted is the Water Reconstruction Program. This project's been a long-standing project over many years, and we actually increased this project significantly over the past decade to catch up. If you think roughly that WSSC has over 4,500 miles of water main and associated connections, and with a goal of roughly 100-year life cycle for these pipes, the math gets pretty high and pretty expensive pretty fast. And for many years, this project was underfunded. And over the past decade, the WSSC has increased the annual miles of reconstruction work to over 50 miles a year at one point. A couple of years ago, because we were experiencing some significant fiscal constraints in WSSC and deferred a number of projects, we did bring this number down a bit. And the rationale there was, first, we had been doing a substantial amount of work for the past decade, so it was felt that we had a little bit of room. But then also WSSC is implementing a lot of new technologies to better target this work. And the hope is that that will also bear fruit and mean that the miles that we are replacing are the right miles to replace, the ones where we have the biggest risk. But this project does start to ramp up the miles again. It was, I believe it was 27 miles in FY21. They're looking at 31 miles in FY22. So you're seeing an increase in the assumption in FY22 and in further years going forward to start to bring that number back up a little bit. We may or may not get back to where we were at the 50 miles, but we are right now probably a little bit too low, and staff does feel we do need to start to inch this project back up. The large diameter water pipe and large valve rehabilitation program. This is certainly for many years it's been one of the highest priorities of WSSC and the two counties. Both counties have experienced significant PCCP pipe failures over the past decade. Fortunately, those have diminished greatly, both because of this program, but also because of the WSSC's acoustic fiber optic monitoring program, which has helped WSSC catch potential or imminent failures before they happen. And that a lot of that work is on the operating side, but this side includes the major pipe segment repairs and replacements. And so as perhaps one, if not the highest priority within the CIP for its below ground infrastructure, this is a project that both councils have supported with substantial dollars over the past decade, and that work is continuing. On the sewer reconstruction side, Mr. Brackett mentioned this is one area where the consent decree on the sewer side has greatly affected spending over the past decade. And actually, a lot of the consent decree work is beginning to move towards conclusion, but you still have a substantial amount of work in the 6-year period. So the project is continuing, but we are hoping to see the tail end of it relatively soon. Certainly the major work has been, or I'd say the phase 1 work has been either completed or mostly completed. And then they have got work behind that to do. But we are starting to see the consent decree work move through and out of the CIP. And then similarly on the trunk sewer side, you also have the consent decree work affecting the larger sewer main projects in this project. The Piscataway Rehabilitation Program is one that has been one of the larger increases the last couple of years as WSSA identified some significant deficiencies in its management of sewage in this particular basin. And there's a lot of operating and capital work that's been added over the last year or two to comprehensively work on this particular issue where they've had some significant sewer system overflows. We are in the process of implementing or implementing the work to meet the Potomac Water Filtration Plant Consent Decree program. This project is, the scope of the project has not changed since the last round with MDE, that included a significant increase last year. But the work is still just beginning on the long-term work is just beginning. The short-term work is for the most part concluded, I believe. But there's a lot of long-term work to do over the next several years. And then, as mentioned before, we have a slew of Blue Plains wastewater treatment plant projects that, at least in the short term, are essentially fixed in the WSSC CIP, with WSSC paying its share of costs for the different work. The Blue Plains plant went through some substantial upgrades over the past decade, or actually 15 to 20 years. And so a lot of the new work is completed, but we are starting to now see at the edges of this CIP the replacement component of that work starting to creep in. But we have seen some decreases in this project in this 6-year period, partly because we're sort of in that gap between when the new work was completed and when some of the replacement work will have to begin. But given the scale of this plant, we always expect this to be a substantial component of the WSSC CIP. And then one of the major above ground projects for WSSC is the Piscataway Bioenergy Project. It's actually under construction and will provide the long-term biosolids solution for WSSC to greatly reduce the biosolids that are remaining and also improve or increase the quality of the biosolids to allow them to have a much higher market value. The project also provides some significant clean energy generation at the plant that provides both offsetting energy savings, but also some revenue from the sale of renewable energy credits. So this project is under construction and moving along, and it represents one of the highest priorities within the WSSC CIP. And then I believe this is the last slide. The Advanced Metering Infrastructure Project has been on the books with WSSC for a number of years and involves basically, as it mentions here, automating the meter reading infrastructure system and creating basically real-time data that you can get from basically getting the meters to ping periodically during the day. I know the council's discussed this a couple times over the last several years. The real news, though, this time around is that last fall, based on a revised cost estimate and payback analysis that was done, the commissioners decided to suspend this project. And basically the mid-cycle update that came over to both councils zeroes out the project. It's about a $98 million original proposed 6-year spending from October 1st that has been zeroed out of this out of the mid-cycle CIP. And as I note in my packet, while it's understandable the commissioners were concerned about the increased cost shown in the project, mainly because of the much broader replacement of meters. The project did achieve an 11-year payback and achieved a number of operational efficiencies that are noted on this slide, including monthly billing, real-time water usage information, leak detection possibilities, more opportunities for more innovative rate structure possibilities, and a number of other benefits. And staff does feel that these benefits are all still there. The technology is there.
I think the commissioners voted on this.
Right.
Right.
What staff is suggesting, though, is, and certainly with a lot of the savings being generated from meter replacement, staff does feel that WSSC does need to, and I know they are, look at what alternatives there are either to AMI in general, for instance, a more aggressive meter replacement program, or if there are some ways to capture some of these benefits in another way with some other kind of solution. I'm not saying that the committee should reinstate this project at this time, But I think that this is
We don't have
something
the
that, given
authority.
the benefits, that we do need WSSC to continue looking at this issue, and especially with regard to meter replacement, because there may be a significant opportunity there, because old meters tend to underread, and that's causing lost revenue for WSSC. And if that could be done in combination with new technology, whether it's AMI or something else, I think that's something that does need to stay on the table. And that's why I think it's important to view the committee's or the commission's action as a suspension and not necessarily permanent cancellation at this point.
Right. Well, I'll leave it to the commissioners to characterize their own action. They're the leadership of WSSC. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to say I have been exploring whether I would move to add this back. However, I'm not going to make that motion now. After consulting with staff, I share the view that we need to figure out if the benefits that this program would provide could be provided through any other means and what that could be. So it sounds to me as though there were concerns about whether there might be a more affordable way to solve some of these issues, and questions have been raised as to the cost benefit. Based on that, to the chair's point, we could add it back here. We would have to get the concurrence of the Prince George's. I mean, it would just be a huge enterprise to try to modify the capital budget here.
It would be extremely unusual to overrule our own.
Correct. It would be extremely unusual. So I'm not going to be moving.
It would be kind of outrageous.
I want to plant the flag that this is really important and it's really needed. There's been a lot of kooky people complaining about wireless radiation, from these devices that should have nothing to do with any consideration. The health impacts have been deeply studied and are well known and are not concerned.
Sure.
But the other issues really
That
matter.
didn't drive the cost estimate up, though. I think they have to the cost estimate.
Right. The cost estimate, I think, was a real concern.
Yes.
So I know the commission has looked at it, and if there are other ways to create some of these advantages for the system, they ought to do it. So I just wanted to say, this is something I hope that they'll continue to work on. Thank you.
Right, and that, I think what staff just suggested is consistent with what Mr. Reamer just said, that this is an issue that needs to be continue to be looked at to see if we can
Right.
grab some of these low-hanging fruit.
Yep. I'm sure the council members will reach a decision on that, Keith. Councilmember Glass, did you want to get in this or not? Okay.
Good.
Roman.
And I think I didn't have a lot else to bring up with regard to the WSSC CIP at this time. I think
Okay.
if you have questions for WSSC on this project or others, they're here as a resource for the committee. And certainly we'll be talking a lot more about the affordability component in the operating budget. For instance, the suspension of the AMI project does mean a significant reduction in debt service. Now, also, it obviously means a reduction in some of the savings that were to be captured. So we can talk about those implications on the operating side. But it is important to recognize that WSSC is a very capital-intensive agency,
Right.
and its CIP is a major driver of its operating budget.
Yes. Is Ms. Reed, you're still here. Do you brought commissioners with you as well? I just wanted to make sure we recognize them, since
Yeah,
we're used to having them in front of us.
Right, and I'm not seeing that they're here today.
Hi, Mr. Beach. Welcome.
Yes, I was just going to say the commissioners are viewing this on the streaming service.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's fine. I just wanted to recognize them if they were all here. Thanks for their hard work on this. Okay, any questions from my colleagues?
So staff's formal recommendation would be for the committee to recommend approval of the WSSC CIP with the mid-cycle update numbers reflected. So that would be the 3.8 billion that was mentioned earlier for the FY22 through 27 CIP.
Okay, any other?
Yeah, if I could just
Yes,
chime.
Councilmember Reamer, or Councilmember Glass, sorry.
Yep. So thank you for the in-depth presentation, and my beagles appreciate it too. It's prime walking time outside. I might need to put myself on mute. That's not going to stop for a while. So let me just plow through real quick. I'm intrigued by the conversation earlier, the point regarding the new development and the type of new development not paying for itself and the type of infrastructure. And I appreciate you laying out the process of how that would need to move forward. We'll have that conversation at another point in time, but I understand the importance of it. And then just more broadly, as we have seen what's happening in Texas and in other parts of the country, how climate change has affected utilities across the board. These conversations are going to be really important. And I know that we've been talking about it over the last number of years, but it continues as we see problems occurring elsewhere. It will shine a light on what we're doing here. And so I support this proposal, but clearly we need to keep an eye on it moving forward.
Right, and I didn't even mention, Mr. Glass, that there is a resiliency project in the CIP with some federal funding assumed to look at some of these long-term sustainability issues. And also, there's also a long-term regional effort to look at water supply and additional storage facilities for the region. And that's something that WSSC is participating in as well with its regional partners.
The new projects in White Oak, when will they be completed?
Well, those are developer funded. I think they show dollars in the first 2 or 3 years of the CIP. But of course, they do depend on all the elements moving forward as presumed by the developer.
Right. So do you know when they'll be completed?
Well, I can ask WSSC to sort of comment on what they receive from the developer. We do have the PDFs, or the project description forms, are in the packet, and I can try to bring those up real quick.
Sorry, I'll see if there's one. That's fine. We can move on. Any other?
If you want to go ahead and mention something else, I can look for them while you're talking.
Okay. I think we've exhausted my colleagues' questions.
Keith, it looks like the projects for White Oak and Viva White Oak would mostly be completed by FY24 based on the schedules that we got from the developers. But since they're developer projects, they will move at their pace. So as fast as they want to go, they will go. So
right. No, it's good news to have anything happening there. Councilmember Reamer.
I just want to say thanks to the commission for the SDC charge rethinking. That's been a big issue, and I think we do have an outdated model, and it has become a barrier to economic development. So I really appreciate their being responsive to the concerns that we've raised and trying to come up with a new approach that is more suited to the kind of growth that we get today. So just compliments to WSSC, lots of compliments on different issues, but I always appreciate it when we're working on something that's tough and they take a hard look and give it some more thought and come up with a new idea.
Absolutely. Okay. So with that, colleagues, are we approving this without objection?
Yep.
Great. Okay. Thanks so much to all of you. Very much appreciate it. Thanks for your great packet, Keith, as usual. And we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.